Hey friends, welcome to the 10 Laws Podcast with East Forest. This is a slightly different episode in that we're talking politics. We're talking the election, and I'm talking with Daniel Pinchbeck about that because he's been doing a lot of writing on it, and I wanted to sort of talk about it myself, but I thought it'd be easier to be in conversation. And Daniel's not afraid to talk about this stuff. He's been diving into it pretty vociferously lately and courageously. So it was like a last-minute thing. I asked him if he wanted to come on, and I was like, let's do it. Let's get it out. I mean, I know that perhaps some of you come to this platform, this space. It's always been a heart-centered space, one where we can feel and understand sort of the bigger concepts going on, and that's always important. And I don't often delve into sort of specifics of sort of the day-to-day happenings as much because I like to be in that space where we can be in feeling, be in metaphor, be in music. And I also feel that right now, having a platform of any kind, as small as it may be, that it's important to bring some of these subjects up, even though I may have fear about that. I fear that, we all have a variety of opinions in this information sickness time that we're in. And yet it feels important to have a little courage just to step out there and say, let's talk about it. So, whatever your political persuasions are or however you're proceeding in this election, I'd encourage you to listen to the conversation, just to listen. There's no threat in that. And that was really my only goal with this, is to have a conversation and to share some thoughts and feelings, because I know things are running kind of hot right now for a lot of us, and I just think it's important to talk. More than anything, it's good to be engaged in our civics, in sort of the unfolding and participation of what it means to be in this collective together that we call a country, as big and crazy as it is. And I certainly understand how for a lot of people, the system most definitely is letting people down. And so there might be one incentive to say, I don't really want to participate right now because it's not going to change and it hasn't helped me in the past. I can understand that. I can also understand people who are saying things aren't really working for me now, the system, the government, what have you. It's a struggle for me. Therefore, I want change. Therefore, I'll do whatever, I'm going with whatever is not this currently. And I can understand that sentiment. And yet what I think is different this time is that it requires us to think with a deep level of nuance, ability for us to hold a lot of disparate ideas at once, and sometimes making difficult choices, between bad or worse. and really holding all of that at once is not easy. It's not fun. It's not even satisfying, but it's the calling of this time right now that we have to do that. And I think the more we can really look at the full picture of not just what's going on, but how we're being manipulated and what is the information that we're receiving, that can only be done by ourselves as we curate our own consciousness, as we curate the information that's coming at us. And that's it. It comes down to each of us to do that ourselves, to recognize what is influencing our opinions, myself included. And I think a form for what I think about for me, like, I don't want to be spiritually bypassing by just thinking about the spiritual concepts, because I think about Ram Dass when he was talking to his teacher, and Ram Dass is complaining that he gets high, it's awesome, but he keeps coming down, and coming down's a bummer. And his teacher Emmanuel is like, Ram Dass, have you ever considered that you're in a school and you could take the curriculum? And so we are trying to take the curriculum, and this is some messy-ass curriculum, but it's important for us to engage in it. And we're being asked to make a choice that's relatively binary. I mean, let's be honest, at least in the presidential sense, coming up very soon in early November. And so I thought I was just going to put this out, and just for the sake of having a little bravery to share and to engage in conversation with it. So thank you for allowing me this space, and I hope it's probably part of many conversations you're having with yourself in private and with other media and forums and friends and so forth. And there's some interesting resources that Daniel puts at the end, for whatever your persuasions are, but there's some really cool tools out there as far as communicating and being actively participating in this process. And I just want to say thanks to everyone on the Patreon and everyone who does support me. That's patreon.com/eastforest. We just put up some highlights from like Denver Portal event, as well as some of my travels and concerts, all that's unreleased. I also put up some new music that's going to be on the next long-form Psychedelic Journey Guidance album. So I get to sneak that stuff out there early over on the council on Patreon. Patreon.com/eastforest. Of course, we also do our monthly Zoom council, and that is amazing. And we're still continuing to get out there with the film Music for Mushrooms. I'm going to be in the Bay Area this weekend in San Rafael, San Francisco. It's also playing in Oakland, and then I'll be going down to Santa Cruz. So that's Thursday, Friday, Saturday. I think Oakland plays for a couple days, multiple days. Go to musicformushrooms.com or eastforest.org. Get your tickets. A lot of these are one night only, and they are going to sell out. So I'm really looking forward to having some panel discussions there with some awesome people. And it's always like a huge joy to be able to share this film that we've been working on finally with so many people. If you don't have a screening near you, definitely go to the newsletter at musicformushrooms.com. And we're going to be doing some digital offerings in the future. And we want to make sure we can all be part of that greater story. After this election, we're going to keep talking. We're going to keep walking. We're going to keep growing. And that's how it is. But for now, we're going to dive into this scintillating discussion with Mr. Daniel Pinchbeck. Well, Daniel, I've been reading a lot of your Substack and dropping into a lot of your content lately, and I just want to applaud you for putting yourself out there so strongly around the subject that gets so much pushback these days. I'm sure you're getting a lot of heat from a lot of people. The election is a fraught subject. But I want to talk to you about it. I haven't really talked about politics much on my platform, and you're encouraging me to just dive in here a bit. And I recognize that there's probably some people in my world, I'm guessing, who are maybe like, I know some people who are like RFK supporters. And now that that's sort of, he's technically not in the election, and like, where's that vote going to go? Or there's some people, I guess, who are maybe, what's the right word, relaxed Trump supporters or naive Trump. They're just sort of casually like, I think I'm going to do that for X, Y, Z. So instead of us like going through all the reasons why Trump is unfit or all that kind of stuff, which is a tired old subject and we could do that forever, it's like, I thought maybe if we just sort of address some of the reasons I'm hearing why people say they are voting for Trump. It's mostly the economy, surveillance state stuff, and some of the things RFK people, which I feel like, honestly, why else do this unless there's some information to help build a bridge to some voters or some people? And I thought maybe we could kind of go through some of those things that we're hearing of why, like, well, this is why I'm voting for Trump, beyond the obvious ones. Like, I don't want to even get into stuff that's, the people we're never going to reach, but.
Yeah, for sure. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me to, have a discussion around these topics. And I do want to start out by saying that I don't feel like I'm a Democratic Party mainstream person. I'm actually much more left, to be honest. I'm more like an anarchist. I wrote a book called How Soon Is Now, where I was trying to look at the effects of the ecological crisis that was going to have on human society and how we would have to reconfigure it. And I saw much more like local, bioregional, participatory democracy, mutual aid, sharing networks. And I still think that's going to be necessary down the line as we see these events like what just happened in North Carolina and Florida. Yeah. Eventually, the federal system is going to become less capable of holding together all of the local areas as they get hit by, droughts, floods, hurricanes, and so on. Insurers are already starting to back away from certain regions. Eventually, there's not going to be the money or the interest or the road, there's to rebuild the roads and the highways and skyscrapers and so on. So then, we will kind of see things devolve in a way. A very interesting model for what could happen in that sense is from Christopher Bach, who this year I got a psychedelic audience. He wrote a great book called LSD and the Mind of the Universe. I have a platform where I do courses called liminal.news. We put one of his lectures for free up on the platform. People would have to go and search for it under his name. But essentially, yeah, he had these visions around kind of a series of disasters getting worse and worse, but at the same time, local communities kind of building new networks of mycelial connections, like finding each other, sharing best practices, and kind of figuring out like a new human immune system forming to the climate crisis. So I'm interested in all of that. So that, I do think stuff like that is kind of inevitable. Okay, so the question is what's happening now, and where are we at this particular juncture, and what is the best, most humane and compassionate and helpful and logical and reasonable decision people can make when they're looking at options that may feel very uncomfortable either way.
And that's what this is about. Like we have two options in this fucked up system. Like it's like I'm not trying to say like, oh, this Democrats are the answer or anything like that. No, it's not a great one, but it's we have pretty binary choice here, and there are stark differences between the options. And I feel like people are not able to. They don't want to hold a lot of nuance.
No,
and this is the same thing was in sort of COVID, but this is not a situation that's very like there's a lot to consider. Even if you take one issue and say, well, that's the issue I'm voting on, I'm like, okay, but you're then saying all these other issues that will be affected. You're sort of not weighing that into this larger calculation.
Exactly. Well said.
So. Given that we're both not here being like, hey, the Democrats are the answer, or it's like, look, if Kamala wins on day one, it's the fight.
Having said that, I do want to say that it's become the negative tonality around the Democrats has been so intense and kind of progressive and like radical and sort of crypto adjacent communities. I do think it's gone a little bit too voracious, and people are like, oh, they did nothing, they're evil. New World Order, George Soros, conspiracy. I think that has all gotten way too far. And I also think, as I'm hoping we'll discuss, that there's a lot of money involved in certain interests who want very much for our country to voluntarily surrender the Constitution and even the limited form of democracy we have for something that would be more like a dictatorship or authoritarian regime, which I believe is what Trump and J.D. Vance represent. And I know, the way this thing's worked out, the right wing has made it so that anything you say, they immediately parrot it, mirror it back to you. They've developed a lot of, sort of convoluted techniques, so they make it very hard for us to make distinctions. But if you go through, and I published on Facebook an essay by my friend Richard Green, looking at like a huge number of bills that either Democrats passed or wanted to pass, just like women's equal rights amendments, worker protection, environmental protections that are all just good for everybody, and except for the corporate, plutocrats. And the Republicans towed the line and tried to reject like every one of these bills almost entirely. The Democrats managed to pass the Inflation Reduction Act, which, while not perfect, it was an effort to kind of do some of the things as part of the Green New Deal. And there are also people now who think that climate change is not really human-made, that it's like some weird variation. That's also part of a New World Order conspiracy. But I think that, there are cases where there is a vast preponderance of scientific evidence. And from my perspective, the impact that CO2 is having on temperatures and climate is something that, basically a huge preponderance of scientists agree on. And only the outliers who don't agree with that are generally the ones who are being funded in one way or another by fossil fuel interests. Okay.
Yeah. And for the sake, though, of the election, it's sort of almost irrelevant. Those people, it doesn't matter. You know what I mean? If you really think about, like you're saying, like the people in the 7 swing states and who are, it's crazy to think maybe haven't made up their mind or are leaning in a particular direction. And if they're saying like, I think it's largely for them the economy or this idea of the surveillance state that they think is going to come from a Democratic president. And I would just say it might be wise to think like, well, let's look at the alternative. Or for some people, it's the Middle East, right? Like maybe both options aren't great, but it's wild to me they think Trump would somehow be better at those. Like Elon Musk, for instance. It's obvious. It seems very transparent why he's supporting him. he's a techno guy. He wants more money, more control, less regulation. He's been told he'll be able to essentially regulate himself and be in charge of some of these things. It's a business move. It's sort of almost existential for the survival of his own businesses. And yet people talk about the Democrats, if they win, being these techno surveillance people.
I think it's going to be best for us if we maybe got a list of the topics and just talk about them one after the next. Otherwise, it's going to be too many. There was a lot of topics you just brought up.
I get fired up about this.
Yeah, I know. So, for instance, like the economic issue. Okay, let's take that one. This idea that Trump is going to be better for the economy. Trump has created this idea of these tariffs. Most economists think that it's a terrible idea, that it'll lead to price wars and all sorts of disasters. He's trying to come up with something, but the main accomplishment of Trump's first term in office, if people might remember, was a massive tax cut on the wealthy. So people who were in like the top tax bracket got a big reduction on the amount they had to pay the government. They paid for this by amping up the national debt. This is something that the Republicans have done going back to Reagan. And the reason they do that is they want to give the wealthy more money and just let them, have oligarchic control of stuff. But they also want a reason to be able to say, we can't afford social services. So we have to cut, public education, libraries, welfare, Medicare. So it's always the same game plan. And Trump just did that to a T. And actually, if you look at, Biden's record around, like, they've brought a lot of industrial manufacturing jobs back. I mean, we can talk about the problems with that too. But for keeping this system that we have now going, the Democrats do a lot better than the Republicans. And the Inflation Reduction Act, I think, is actually, in theory, like a great thing. The idea is to create 1.5 million new jobs in renewable energy infrastructure and manufacturing. Okay, so we know that oil is a non-renewable resource. It's becoming harder and harder to extract. That's why, we've created like fracking and, tar sands and so on, because we've gotten most of the more easily available oil. So we're having to dig much deeper or use more energy to extract it in these more cumbersome ways. And it's heating up the planet. So we absolutely fundamentally need to make a massive transition to a renewable energy infrastructure. Now, the Republicans have no interest in this because the Republicans are the party that's owned by the fossil fuel companies. They're owned by the Koch brothers. They're owned by Exxon. They're owned by all these companies, Occidental. And these companies, have billions invested in fossil fuel infrastructure and want to just keep drilling and drilling and drilling till the last degree because, oil it's like the largest profit center that we've ever discovered. So if you're making billions and billions like a week from oil, you don't want to give that up. The Biden and the Democrats are not perfect. They're sluggish. They're mediocre. I don't think the Kamala Harris campaign was done very well. They're wasting money on TV ads. Sometimes the Republicans, the right wing, can be more clever in how they're using digital media. And certainly they've learned a lot of mimetic warfare skills from Putin and so on. But in many, many areas, we'll find that the Democrats, if you're not super wealthy or able to move to New Zealand, if everything goes to hell, the Democrats are going to be much better for us to kind of hold together what we have. The fact is, unfortunately, in some ways, we've passed the point of like peak everything, and it's going to be a little bit of a different world going forward, which none of the political parties can really address because everything in the American mentality is based on material progress and getting better and better. We can already see that's not really happening, which is why people are getting into like drug addiction and fentanyl, and so on. And anyway, so a long story. But when it comes to the economy, cutting taxes on the rich so that you can blow up the national debt, so you can then cut social services, that's the Republican game plan. The Democrat game plan has been more like rebuild industry in the U.S., create a new industry for renewable infrastructure. There was also the CHIPS Act that the Democrats put together. I mean, that Inflation Reduction Act, not one Republican voted on it, okay? So it was all Democrats just managed to get that in. But the CHIPS Act is also for manufacturing semiconductors and chips in the U.S., So, okay, maybe that's also environmentally not so great, but we're all using the smartphones. Unless we figure out something else, we're using the new computers, we're using AI, so that allows America to, have a base of that type of development here, rather than having to go to China or, Taiwan, which China is threatening or whatever, to get that kind of stuff. Okay, so that's the economy piece. What was another area that you wanted to talk about?
Well, I want to go through the pieces that people say why they're voting for Trump. I'd say the other two are this. I hear this surveillance state stuff, which is a little confusing to me. It's probably based on a lot of social media. I'm guessing that one's a little confusing, so we could talk about that. And the other one I think is people talk about the Middle East or Gaza.
Okay, there's another two which we should add to that: immigration, which they're using. They're really going after. That's one of his big things right now. And obviously, the vaccines is still lingering in the background for a lot of people's hostility towards the Democrats.
I think that's part of surveillance state. I would suppose they're putting that in the same bucket. I would guess. But let's talk about that one because. First off, Trump made the vaccine, and it started in his administration. And I don't want to sit here and go through like the whole COVID, what happened, and how policies were made, and all that kind of stuff. It's more just like what they think would happen in the future. And again, compare it to what we see from Trump, or like what Elon Musk wants to do, who's now his supporters. And the people that are trying to make this kind of policy with Project 2025. It does not seem to me if there's any indication that there's some kind of increased freedom or freedom of speech. I mean, it's pretty ironic for Elon Musk to talk about freedom of speech when he buys Twitter and shuts down journalistic voices all the time that he just doesn't like. It's like it's crazy to me. It's like he's some sort of bastion of free speech. He wants certain information that he wants out there, and others that he doesn't. So where do you think this surveillance state stuff's coming from?
Yeah, so I mean, we do have a very, intricate, our problem is that we always want to simplify, and we want to make like a, good and bad polarity. So, for some people now it's like right-wing good, liberals bad. For others it's, liberals bad, good, right-wing bad or whatever. So, I think that the right wing is considerably worse in almost every area across the board when we actually conceive of what like our future could be and our children's future, unless you're part of that super rich echelon or something. But some of these things are complicated. I mean, unfortunately, with the development of the internet, digital surveillance has become, very, very easy. And we know that under both Democratic and Republican kind of, what do they call? They're not called regimes. What do they call them? They call them political, whoever won. There's a word for
administrations.
Administrations. Yeah. Thank you very much. There have been, infractions, the CIA and the FBI going over the line, using data they shouldn't have used.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
We know that the whole vaccine, the COVID situation was extremely murky and ambiguous. We still don't really know. We may never know, whether COVID was sort of designed in a lab, which I tend to think was the case. Was it kind of a bioweapon? Did it get it out accidentally? Did it support all sorts of weird pharmaceutical companies? It's all such a murky mess.
And the New York Times. I mean, the New York Times had a pretty big article where they kind of laid out how it's most likely it came from Wuhan. And it kind of just went under the radar. And everyone's like, well, let's not really talk about this.
So still a lot of people are very angry at the Democrats for, more or less mandating vaccines here. Although that was also done around the world, including in a lot of countries that had much further right-wing type governments, whether it was China or whatever. So it's like, basically in the history of humanity, there's a big new pandemic. Everyone is terrified. People are dropping dead. If there's a vaccine, it was just like everybody would just take the vaccine. Now, I know these were somewhat experimental. They were kind of rushed. I also admit that I didn't trust the mRNA vaccines and ended up getting the one that was not mRNA, which was Johnson & Johnson. I never got a booster or anything. So, and I do understand legitimate concerns people have that, they caused health problems. The mainstream preponderance of evidence in the scientific community is that COVID was far more damaging than the vaccines. And there are some people who've done a very good job picking apart the arguments of different anti-vaxxers. One of my favorite YouTube channels for this is I think it's called Debunk the Funk with Bill Wilson. So, and he's a hippie-ish looking guy with a big afro, which makes him a little more relatable. But he takes like Steve Kirsch or Robert Malone or Alex Berenson or RFK Jr. He looks at all the things that they proclaim are the truth. And then he shows that they're actually cherry picking or diluting, deceiving, because frankly, there's been a huge amount of money to be made in the anti-vaccine, rhetoric game, and in sort of stoking constant fear and anxiety. And you also notice that a lot of the people who are stoking that fear and anxiety for money tend to be on the right wing, on the libertarian side. So this whole idea that seems to develop, basically, if you're like a white, particularly a male person, middle class or above, who grew up in America, from the 50s, 60s to today, you never were asked to go to the draft. The country never really asked anything of you. And so you began to develop, and it also had this ethos of hyper-individualism. So we ended up with this idea that to be asked to do anything uncomfortable and maybe slightly unknown or dangerous for the sake of the community and for the sake of other people, that was something to be very, very suspicious of. And this all went with the growing mistrust in government institutions and the establishment media. And there are some good reasons for that. The media has betrayed us. Institutions, institutions are not perfect. The government is not perfect. It's a bit of a mess. So we're kind of like in a murky gray area, so that's the problem. Now, going forward, the question is, you have a choice November, are you going to vote for the Democrats or the Republicans, or a protest vote for Jill Stein or somebody, which is basically just throwing away the vote? Now, who's likely to protect freedoms that we care about going forward? So I strongly recommend people look up a hidden camera interview that CNN put up with, I believe his name is Russell Voigt, who was one of the authors of the Project 25. He's from the Heritage Foundation, and he was one of Trump's cabinet members. In fact, I think he's one of the only 4 of Trump's 44 cabinet members.
4 people, 44 people.
This guy should never, ever be allowed to serve as president ever again. And he's the most dangerous person to the country that they've ever encountered. But this guy is all for Trump. And in this hidden camera interview, these guys managed to pretend they were like the family of a big donor. And he was like, Trump knows all about Project 25. We know that he's going to say in public that he doesn't know anything about it. He's going to put it down. That's part of our game, because as soon as he's elected, we're going to institute Project 25. We're ready. And what Project 25 basically says is all of the current civil servants, which are kind of unelected bureaucrats, people who serve in all the departments, they're all fired. Okay, the Supreme Court allows this massive firing. We install our Christian nationalist people, okay? And we've created a new government starting then. And, one of the main immediate things we're also going to do is a nationwide ban on abortion in all circumstances, whether it's rape, whether it's emergency medical, abortion is going to be gone nationwide. And and then if you look into, some of the main people who are supporting this, right-wing, election campaign, the tech magnates like Elon Musk and Peter Thiel and Larry Ellison, who's one of Trump's biggest donors. So Peter Thiel has a security software called Palantir, which is already used by the CIA and the military, highly efficient apparatus for surveillance, for spying. Thiel's technology, Lavender AI, is being used in Gaza to track suspects, potential people who are part of the Palestinian organization, but they've also ended up killing a lot of civilians and so on. So it seems to be highly likely that this type of stuff will then be used on the U.S. citizens. And even more drastic, Larry Ellison, by the way, I have all these links if you go to my recent Substack, danielpinchbeck.substack.com. I can't remember which piece it was, but I put all the, a whole trove of these links. You can
We've Been Hijacked 2, Part 2.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we've been hacked.
Hacked.
So Larry Ellison has basically said that, yeah, they're going to use Oracle with AI to keep everybody in line. There'll be a massive surveillance thing. So basically, they're telling us that if the right wing win, they're going to institute something in the U.S., very much like a social credit, keep everybody in line, AI orchestrated surveillance program that, will have a Christian nationalist bent to it. Now, we've had 4 years of Biden-Harris. Have we seen anything like that? Have we seen digital vaccine passports? Have we felt more surveillance? Have we felt less freedom? I would say no. I personally, I write about crazy stuff all the time. I haven't felt any impingement on
Well,
my...
it's not coming from the government as much as it's coming from tech companies. I mean, so if the tech companies are supporting Trump, it would be logical that it's like they just want to do more. They want to make money off our data, and the more control they have, the more access they have, the better for them.
Exactly. So that's the surveillance front. So from my perspective, just as with the economics, people think that Trump is going to be better for the economy. Actually, the Democrats are much more rational, much more sane. We'll build renewable energy infrastructure. We'll bring industry back here. Won't reduce taxes on the wealthy to cut all the social services. When it comes to surveillance, we can see Larry Ellison saying straight out, big Trump donor. He wants to institute a massive, keep everybody on their best behavior, which essentially means Chinese social credit system. We will get that, I believe, if the Republicans get in, particularly if they get in with both the executive branch and the legislative branch. So it's a very important thing to prevent that. Okay.
I guess another one also is sort of healthcare. We don't have to talk much about it, but it's absurd to think that there is no Republican healthcare plan. Like, if you don't like Obamacare, I don't think it's great, but I remember when I couldn't sign up for healthcare because I broke my arm. They're like, so I mean, is that what you want? Like, I would rather move towards perhaps we can have the option of Medicare or something, but it's like, it's crazy to think like somehow healthcare would be better if you try to dismantle Obamacare. And I think most people want some kind of healthcare. They don't want to go bankrupt.
Totally. I mean, it's a shame that the Democrats, because they're, so in collusion with the pharmaceutical and the medical establishment, couldn't have just come out and offered like a really good universal health care plan, because we know that 60% of Americans want that. And so it's annoying that the Democrats, because of however they're, kind of financing work and the structure, however they're compromised, they don't simply offer these things that we know the vast majority of people in the U.S. want. That would make this election a no-brainer, I believe. But yes, they don't do that. So sure. I mean, if you look at Trump's, achievements with health, I just posted about it today. Let me see if I can pull it up.
His achievements with health. That's a great phrase. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's
his achievements with health is like staying alive after eating burgers his entire life and statin drugs.
Yeah. Let me see if I can just find this. I'm not going to be able to find it. Anyway, it's on my Instagram. But essentially, all these cancerous causing chemicals, unknown food additives, just pouring it all on, plus, fossil fuel, by drill, baby, drill is Trump's idea. So like the more, of that we do, the worse it is for asthma, for everybody's health, reducing environmental regulations on corporations. Very bad.
Rubber chemicals.
So people think that RFK is this, this somehow this like, heroic, wizard of health or whatever. I honestly see RFK as a very troubled, kind of narcissistic person with an addict personality. He had one of his wives committed suicide because of the many affairs he was having, keeping from her. He as people get older, I think we see that with a lot of the guys who gravitate to the right. If you have like a narcissistic desire for a lot of attention, and you've gotten to like, do all these crazy things in your life, you want like bigger and bigger dopamine hits of attention and fame and so on. So I don't know all of his motivations, but I know that the entire environmental movement, which he, claims to have dedicated his life to, they've completely distanced themselves from him in a big letter, like Sierra Club. All these groups are like, we think that he's just terrible. We want nothing to do with him anymore. So I know that's painful for people who have decided that RFK Jr. is some kind of, health hero for them. But I think this is total crap. And when you look at the policies that Trump put into place, and the negative impacts on human health, I don't think that's going to stop under the next administration. I think RFK will, if that is really what he believes he's going to be doing, he's going to be very disappointed. And RFK also switched from environmental protectionist to saying, free market capitalism is the right way to protect the environment. And there's absolutely no evidence that free market anything is going to protect the environment. The only way to protect the environment from corporate predation and oligarchy is to just have regulations, to have corporations, strongly regulated so they can't pour poison into the air and the water and so on.
Yeah, or do things like the Infrastructure Act, which, while imperfect, is a first step in incentivizing from a monetary point of view for corporations to want to do green things. I'm just, at least that's going in the direction where it's like you want the capitalist system, you have to incentivize it to go in that direction. And I don't think there's any reason to think that, again, it's not even, there's no point even talking about the character of Trump, but it's like, he's transactional. Whatever he's promised RFK, or he's using him to get votes, and I don't think he would listen to any policy anyway. People are thinking that's why I'm supporting Trump, because I want RFK to get in there and shape health policy. Yeah. I doubt that would happen.
We all know Trump is the ultimate opportunist.
He screws everybody.
He's actually, I find him a little bit fascinating because, in a way, like with somebody like that, there's no past and there's no future. He just is like moving from point to point. And so whoever is providing the billions or whoever that's coming in, he'll just pivot. And because he was a Democrat, before he got into this whole thing. With the tech overlords, I think that, I've been doing a lot of research and work right now on the background of Elon Musk and Peter Thiel. There's a fantastic Medium essay, dossier published anonymously about how Elon Musk is basically seeking to become monarch or king of America, and it's actually, when you get into the details, it's quite extraordinary and quite intense. And both Peter Thiel, who's a very powerful, billions of dollars sports right wing. He was the one who paid for J.D. Vance's Senate campaign in 2018. And Elon Musk are part of something called the Dark Enlightenment. And they're actually inspired by this thinker, Curtis Yarvin, who goes also by the name Mencius Moldbug, and another thinker called Nick Land. And these guys say, democracy sucks. We don't want any form of democracy. The only form of government that makes sense to us is basically turning the U.S. into a corporation and having a CEO king who has total autocratic control over America. And they think that Musk is the right man for the job.
Well, ironically, after the Supreme Court ruling, we kind of have that right now, like with immunity to the president, which is somewhat insane.
Yeah, unless they change the Constitution, Musk will never be president. But quite interestingly, he recently, I think Wired magazine reported, he secretly registered in Delaware new corporations. Like one of them is United States of America, Inc. So one thing about Musk, there's also a long, very fascinating kind of podcast with his father, Errol Musk, that you can watch. I listened to it very closely. So Errol was, South African, supporter of apartheid, kind of white, colonialist, imperialist, ran an emerald mine. Some of the money that, Elon had to start his companies came from, black, miners who were mining those emeralds under horrible conditions. So basically they're part of this whole structure. But the other thing that really comes through in that podcast is that his dad was clearly an abusive narcissist who was still even belittling Musk during the interview. And so in a way, you could see that somebody like Musk is not only a narcissist himself, but he's kind of a narcissist extension of this kind of brutal father figure. And then if you go back a generation to his mother's father, very interestingly, his grandfather on his mother's side was part of something called I think it was called the Technorat Party in the 30s and 40s, where it was basically this idea. His grandfather was arrested at a certain point. Basically, the idea was for being part of this organization was seen as, I guess, dangerous or something seditious. But the idea is that ultimately scientists and engineers should rule society, and we should do away with nations and democracies. Essentially, ultimately, you would have Canada, North America, and Mexico as one block, kind of resource block, under the rule of once again, a kind of autocrat, monarch, CEO, king, who would be able to apportion all of the resources as they see fit. And with both Thiel and Musk, they're also, along with the Dark Enlightenment, they ascribe to this TESCREAL philosophy, which I'm not going to remember all of it. It's like transhumanism, effective altruism, singularity, cosmism. I can't remember what the R is right now.
Well, I've heard like some people and some Google guys, like being a humanist to them is negative.
Yeah.
Like, oh, you're a humanist.
Yeah,
like, ugh.
And Musk has said repeatedly that empathy is trash. He also said when he was challenged about, a mining, a coup in Bolivia where we get our lithium mining, he's like, yeah, we'll coup whoever we need to coup. So the ultimate agenda of this TESCREAL singularity ideology is to build artificial superintelligence in order for the certain people who are running the show to actually become immortal. So they'll either by either merging with the digital realm or by developing like a superhuman body, or if you read The Singularity is Near, Ray Kurzweil talks about this, with like nanobots that can clean the blood and clean all the cells and everything. Whatever it is, that's this sort of power, this sort of ultimate ego power trip that these guys are on. And for them, the world is kind of their toy, and they want to basically suck all of the resources of the planet into this effort to create, artificial superintelligence and instantiate their egos as immortal. I know that sounds radical and insane, but that kind of is what all of the evidence points toward. And in a way, it's cool in a sort of dark science fiction-y way. It just means that so many, everybody else is going to be just treated like crap to achieve this goal. We can talk about maybe the immigration issue if you want.
Yeah, let's keep it moving. Immigration. I mean, just on the level of like, most of the Trump campaign has been about fear, of course. Just trying to scare you as opposed to any sort of positive future. It's not to say that immigration it has been a very messy policy for decades. Across many administrations. It's not something that has been fixed, and rightly so. It's like many of these issues. Yeah, it is. There's a lot of problems. But the idea of giving any power to Stephen Miller, to create potentially like camps or deport people, or once people actually see like children being pulled out of homes, they're going to be like, this isn't what I was thinking I was signing up for. We get this sort of, again, simplistic view of like, oh yeah, let's tamp down immigration. It's like, first off, do you even know what that means or what that would look like? Or what is the problem we're actually talking about? I don't see why I would want someone who's facing that issue at least to have some compassion. Yeah. And of course, I see none in Trump.
Okay, so it's also just like, one thing that we have, one of the big problems we have right now is like a total context collapse. Like somehow the impact of what's called the outrage machine of social media has led people to like being very like ant-brained in how they think about, issues that are complicated and have a lot of history to them. Immigration. I mean, one facet is we actually need a lot of illegal and legal immigrants in the U.S. Stephen Ratner wrote a piece in the New York Times how for the U.S. to keep its economic engine going, we need like at least 1 million new immigrants per year to replace our aging workforce. So that's just like, if we don't keep bringing in a lot of immigrants to do all the jobs that people here either don't want to do or whatever, whether it's farm hands or service jobs or whatever, or maybe delivery people and so on. Actually our economy would sort of grind to a halt. So that's one of the unspoken realities that's going on here. Now, another issue is like, well, why are these people coming here? Like, they had homes. Like, why are they leaving their homes? So it's like, I live in the East Village. Nearby, there's a Catholic school that was abandoned that's been converted to a processing center for people seeking political asylum in the U.S. And a lot of these people are from Africa and South America. Okay, so I noticed. So I would walk around my block and I would see like lines of very black men lining up. Sometimes staying up all night in the cold, even in the winter, to try to get a place to sleep. A new assignment of a bed for that night. And I was like, where are these people coming from? Why are they here? And I found out that a lot of them were coming from, like, for instance, Ivory Coast. There are other places too. But then I looked up the situation in the Ivory Coast. And the situation in the Ivory Coast is that their main export crop, which was like 50% of their GDP, is chocolate. Okay. Our companies, Nestle's and Hershey's, are the main companies that are working with this chocolate crop in the Ivory Coast. And they've corrupted the government. They work with this corrupt government, and because of this extensive demand for chocolate from our consuming habits, 80% of the Ivory Coast has been deforested. So people who used to just live in natural environments with the forest, they can't do that anymore. And as climate change, global warming increases, they can't even do subsistence level farming anymore. So some of them are eking out a life as a chocolate farmer. Now guess how much, and apparently it's difficult and dangerous work. Guess how much the average chocolate farmer in the Ivory Coast makes per day?
Probably less than $1.
Yeah, 78 cents a day. The average worker for, ultimately the products for Hershey's and Nestle, so we can have M&Ms and Kit Kats and Snickers bars and all of that stuff. These guys are watching their whole environment melt down, and they're making 78 cents a day. So in many cases, a whole family will get together and support one of these guys flying to South America, or even a family. And apparently there are families that flew from Africa to Brazil, and then they just start walking north to the American border where they hope for a better life. And sometimes they walk like a year, just walking, like half starved to get to the Mexican border. Then if they're lucky enough, they get over the border. And then if they get over the border, they might be lucky enough to be picked up. So the governor of Texas, as a sort of screw you to the East Coast liberals, was shipping these guys to New York, where we have a political asylum law, which means they can't just be thrown out of the country. They have a few years where they can prove that they were really under duress and so on. So then these guys come here. So if they can get a job at as a delivery person for, I don't know what our minimum wage is now. It's really bad, right? It's like
isn't it? Well, federal's still super low.
15.
But I mean, no way. No, that was like Bernie Sanders wanted that, and we never got it. I'm gonna say federal minimum wage in 2024 is $7.25.
Wow. So even that, if these guys can save a few dollars a day, that's a huge boon for their families back home if they can send it back to them. So there's the whole idea of demonizing these people, othering them, making them inhuman, when actually it was like, unfortunately, a lot of our extractive corporate policies have led, and now also like we've used up the majority of the fossil fuels. Now China's also used a lot of it, Europe some of it, that has created this global warming, which our fossil fuel companies knew about 40 and 50 years ago, but just decided to keep it quiet and spread disinformation and use psyops and mind war to make sure that people didn't understand what was happening. Now we're seeing these huge climate catastrophes, which are just going to be getting more and worse in the next years, the next decade.
Well, there's shale. I mean, there's all the worst ways of getting oil. America is, I think, producing the most oil it's ever pulled out, and that there's more to get, I guess. But it's just like it's crazy to think you go deeper, you can use more energy to pull out a gallon of oil than you used to, because it makes money.
Yeah.
It's insane. But for immigration, it's just to say that that we do need reform, and we do need to fix it. Is definitely severely broken. And yes, a lot of these economies have been deeply destabilized by the United States economy, by the West. Absolutely. We're complicit in why this immigration, in addition to climate change, which is only going to get worse around the world. I mean, it's probably, you could say, is what's pushing a lot of the populist movements around the world.
Of course.
In Europe, in here. So, I mean, in a lot of ways, it's like, but it's like putting fire on fire. It's like, just like fighting back, deport, build up walls. It's like, that's not going to work.
Yeah. Well, I mean, sadly it can work, but ultimately then you end up with something like, either casual mass murder or explicit genocide. We find that, for instance, in Europe, they're not allowing Syrian refugees to land on their rafts. So we don't even know how many people are dying at sea out there as they try to get to Greece or Spain or whatever. Anyway, so yeah, so
you need nuanced, smart thinking on it. You don't need like a one size fits all type.
Ultimately, if we're going to avert mass death by heating and famine and all that stuff, we're going to have to relocate a huge number of people to places like Canada and Siberia, because a lot of the global south is going to become relatively uninhabitable in the next 20 or 30 years. And I talked to somebody at the RAND Corporation, which is a think tank. They said theoretically 2 billion people could be resettled in Canada, where there's abundant land, and also it's going to get warmer and more arable and so on. I mean, we're not even having any discussions like that globally, because at the moment, in any form of cooperative kind of infrastructure, has basically disintegrated as we enter this kind of multipolar world where there's a kind of cutthroat war between autocracies like what they have in Russia or China, and kind of liberal democracies like they have in Europe, and we still have in the U.S. if we can keep it after November 5th. So that's a big question right now.
Do you want to talk about the Middle East, or is this just a hornet's nest?
No problem. I think since your audience is probably a lot of psychedelic people, I think we should also talk about kind of a little bit what has maybe happened to the transformational psychedelic community and how it maybe lost its way a little bit in the last number of years. As I see, when I'm on Facebook and so on, a lot of people who I thought were just cool, liberal, spiritual mystics with good values and into psychedelics seem to have, toggled over through the RFK, Russell Brand, Charles Eisenstein kind of pipeline into, MAGA mania. And, part of what I've been trying to do day after day is just sort of maybe offer people this alternative model of who's really the villains here and who's really doing the conspiracy work. I know there's this whole idea of the Democratic Party and the World Economic Forum and George Soros, yada yada. And I think there's some validity to some of that, but is that actually maybe far less nefarious than Putin, Trump, Thiel, Musk, Heritage Foundation, Opus Dei, a secretive Catholic corporation that ran Franco's economics in Spain. Oh, and I do want to mention, if you really want to go down this rabbit hole, there's a recent book that came out called Unhumans. People can look up on Amazon. I think the guy's name is Persobiec, very far right-wing dude. Steve Bannon, Trump's former campaign manager, Donald Trump himself, and J.D. Vance all give positive blurbs on this book, saying that it's a great book and it's putting out a good plan. But what Unhumans actually says is that leftists, socialists, liberal Democrats are actually unhuman. They're non-human. They don't have to be treated in the way we treat human beings. And the book actually looks at Franco and Pinochet. Pinochet was the dictator of Chile, and Franco was the dictator of Spain for 35 years. They were both ruthless in their repression. They imprisoned, tortured, and killed their political opponents. Franco, killed the poet Garcia Lorca because he was gay and a communist and so on. And so they're saying that these guys is what we should be doing here. And we should be, which means that, Trump has been saying over and over again, and even more recently, that, when it comes to Nancy Pelosi or Charles Schumer, he wants to imprison them. He wants to bring the military. I mean, this is pure fascism. And you also have Kelly, who I guess was Trump's chief of staff, just in the last couple of days coming out in these interviews and saying, yeah, Trump is a fascist. What he wants to do is fascism. Musk, Vance, Peter Thiel, if they're supporting Trump, they are fascists and they're supporting fascism. Okay. And it's a Christian variety of fascism, but that's what you had with Franco too. You had Catholic fascism, you had Opus Dei, so Vance is probably a member of Opus Dei, or he's very close to it. And essentially, if we allow Trump and Vance into office, we're going to get a, Christian nationalist fascism. That's what's going to happen. Particularly if we also lose the legislative branch. If the legislative branch goes Democrat and the executive branch goes
Yeah. Well,
Republican,
The Senate probably will, and so we're talking about the House, which might,
yeah. We
and
don't
then
want
there's
to go down there because the Supreme Court has also given the president so much power. It's just insane. So the Middle East. So my perspective is that Trump and the right wing are going to be far more destructive for anybody who cares about Palestinian lives or that whole region or Arab lives and so on. I mean, one of the things that Trump did when he was in office is he moved the U.S. embassy to Israel, which signaled that
Jerusalem.
Jerusalem,
Yeah.
which signaled that Jerusalem was now the capital of Israel. And everybody knew, like the Democrats hadn't done that, no other administration had done that, because they knew that was going to exacerbate and inflame all of the tensions in the region and embolden Jewish extremism. So months after he did that, Jewish military and Jewish extremists attacked Muslim worshippers at the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Okay, now maybe a lot of people don't know, but the Al-Aqsa Mosque is the flashpoint for kind of the Book of Revelation, the Apocalypse. Like a lot of energy in that region is centered on that particular point, because according to the Book of Revelation, that's where the Temple of Solomon was built and destroyed twice. And for rapture and all that stuff to happen, the third Temple of Solomon has to be built where that mosque is now. So, and for Muslims, it's also a very sacred site. So when the Israelis rushed in and attacked worshippers there, that was seen as incredibly sacrilegious. And that's why when Hamas attacked Gaza, or from Gaza, they called it Al-Aqsa flood. So it was directly retaliation or retribution for the Israelis attacking Muslim worshippers. And that was set into motion by Trump moving the capital to Jerusalem, or giving
Yeah,
Israel.
and then he would be happy to let Netanyahu do whatever he wants.
Yes. And
He'd be like, we're out. We don't want to do anything.
Netanyahu clearly very much wants Trump to win this election. In fact, Thomas Friedman in the New York Times has been writing that it's quite likely that Netanyahu is even turning the screws and making things worse right now, because he knows that those angry screams of the Palestinians are hurting Kamala Harris's chances to win this election. And so he wants Trump in there. Trump has said he doesn't care what Bibi does to those people. He wants to give him a free hand. They basically want him to do the genocide even more efficiently. And what is another piece of the puzzle? No, that's pretty good. I think.
But just on a fundamental level, it seems quite obvious that Trump's policies towards Gaza or any of Arab people would be far worse.
Yeah.
I don't love the choices we have, but it's like that seems on face value. There's clear evidence for that.
Yeah, and I know that people are a lot of leftists are not going to vote. A lot of people I know are abstaining because of what's happening in Gaza, but I think they're making a huge mistake because.
You're essentially voting for Trump. It's really a challenging situation, but I'm just like, look, if you can get Kamala Harris to win, it means that on day one of her administration, you go back to the task of fighting these people to get justice, to get what needs to be done. But it's just like we have this immediate thing we need to deal with, which is like none of that would matter. If you're gonna have deaf ears. If we become an isolationist country.
The other thing I wanted to point out, there's a very good book I read. Because at first, when October 7th happened, I'm half Jewish on my mother's side. I was a little bit defensive and supportive of Israel and their first fighting back. It was only when it went on, and I realized that it was about much more than just getting the hostages back. That, it seems like there's a lot of settlers who want to take over that land and take over land in Lebanon and so on. And I began to realize just how, terrible the whole situation was. I read a book called The State of Israel versus the Jews by a former Zionist who basically ended up arguing that Israel, as it is now, is the most dangerous and the worst thing for the Jewish diaspora, for Jews all around the world. It makes everybody's life much more dangerous and imperiled, and it should be separated. And the reason that white Christian nationalists and sort of dictators who, kind of like form their populist movements, love Israel. They're jealous of Israel because they want to be able to, as a ethnic religious minority, repress their minority populations with the same brutality and openness that Israel is doing it. So Israel is seen as a model for white populist nationalist movements, like what Trump and Vance want to do in the U.S. So if you want to not let things get worse, if you want to actually prevent all the stuff that we're talking about here, it's very important to support the Democrats in this upcoming election. Now, I want to say there are things that people can do besides just voting themselves, even in the 10 days, 11 days that we have left, that can be very, very, very helpful. Okay. And I've been just did a training yesterday. I put it on my Facebook page with this application called Reach. So I think it's like Reach. I can look it up actually, or we can put it in your show notes. It's like Reach.vote or something.
Reach.vote.
Yeah. So that is an app. It's a genius piece of political technology that they developed in 2018. You basically get on the app, you join the campaign, Take Back the House. It can scan your contacts. It doesn't keep any of the data, but it finds where your contacts match people in their database. And you can find out who you may know, particularly in the swing states, who are worth contacting, who maybe are not Democrat or undeclared. So if enough people were to use this app in the next week, we would be able to micro-target people who maybe are like bored or out of it or haven't been paying attention, or there are thousands of people like this. And we know that the 2016 election was won by just a few thousand votes. It could come down to a very, very small number of votes. And those votes are waiting to be found if enough people start to use this Reach app. Now, another tool that's really good is Move the Vote, which I think is movement.vote. So that's one that's great. And then Seed the Vote is also terrific. So if you want to give money, or if you want to get involved with like phone banking or canvassing, those are avenues to look into. If you want to use the Reach system, the Reach app, in order to access contacts that you may have in swing states, because if we can get anybody who's in Ohio, Michigan, North Carolina, Georgia, I'm not sure what the fifth one is.
Ohio.
Not Ohio. What is it? Georgia, Michigan,
Nevada, Georgia, Michigan, with Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Arizona.
Yeah. So if we know people in those states, if they get on this app and they use their contacts and get a group of, say, 10 friends together, it could be like hundreds of votes that would otherwise be not accessed. That's why I'm telling people who have bigger networks than I do, like you or Alex Gray or whoever, that this would be a really fantastic thing to push. Even in the last days of this election, it could make a huge difference, and it's turned some congressional elections in the past. I'm a little bit tired now, but Move the Vote, as I remember, is also a really good one.
All right. Well, I know we went longer. Look, man, I know that I get that we are in a broken system. We're in collapse. This is like the 2012 transition.
So Move the Vote. Move the Vote goes to local grassroots groups, turning out the hardest to reach voters who tip the scales in the places that matter most. It's movement.vote. It's quite an amazing kind of organization, and these can actually overturn. And we know that what's his name, Musk, is walking around Pennsylvania with a big, cynical, cheesy grin on his face, giving out $1 million checks every day to random voters who register. And he's not doing that, because he wants humanity to win or he cares about people. He's doing that because he wants to get rid of regulation. He wants more power. He wants more control. That's the same reason why he's spending tens of millions in Michigan on micro-targeted ads, where they're putting ads essentially in Arab communities that are, talking about how Harris is totally pro-Israel and how they should hate her. And then he's taking ads that are in Jewish communities in Michigan and giving them micro-targeted ads that say Harris is really anti-Israel, and that's why we should hate her. So
the ad said that her husband is Jewish. That's all it said. I mean, it was completely anti-Semitic. I mean, It was just like, wow, this is so blatantly horrible.
Yeah, well, it turns out that Musk, unfortunately, I kind of liked him before. I used to see him wandering around Burning Man. I have friends who partied with him all over the world and so on. But, hopefully maybe he's, I think a lot of people go into kind of like a spell or a trance. It's particularly, this is where Russell Brand is another one. Like I had a friendship with him and a connection with him, and now he's become a Trump supporter and a sort of very cheesy born-again Christian selling like tacky amulets. the way that this social media has impacted people's brains is really scary.
Yeah. We're being manipulated on social media in pretty overt ways by outside actors, and I don't think people are really taking stock in how powerful that's been in the last, 10 years.
It's like the way messaging has an ambient effect, right? Like, so, and the Heritage Foundation figured this out. Koch brothers figured this out like decades ago. So, like, they would fund somebody like Charles Murray, who wrote The Bell Curve, which basically argued that certain minority groups like African Americans have a lower IQ just innately. So there's, so the implication, which was very explicit in Charles Murray's other works, is therefore it doesn't make sense to pay for their education and so on. They're just sort of useless citizens, So it doesn't matter if everybody read The Bell Curve or even saw Charles Murray speak directly. Once these ideas are in the ambiance, like, some people know what they are, but they just start to move through the mimetic field. And so the right wing has learned how to manipulate the mimetic field, using deceptive media, mind war, disinformation. Like, for instance, the thing with the hurricanes, where it went out, and a lot of Facebook people were saying, somehow the Democrats had, used weather modification technology. It's almost like Kamala Harris was like the Wicked Witch of the West, like turning some big machine to cause these hurricanes to go through North Carolina and Florida. So that's how twisted people's minds have become. And they don't realize that they've been subject to many, many different forms of brainwashing, mind programming, mind control efforts that have been, executed now for quite a long time. As we know, with 2016 election, Cambridge Analytica, ultimately Facebook was forced to pay $6 billion for what it did with Trump and so on. So unfortunately, these these tech companies are not necessarily good actors. And you have like Putin, for instance. This has been a cheap method for him to cause as much damage to the American psyche as possible. And he's quite an evil genius, and he's done an incredible job. Now, luckily, we still have a little bit of time. Now, I know what happens that when people have, there are probably a lot of people who are listening to this. I don't know how many people you get listening, but some at least will be like, oh, that's all bullshit. We know the Democrats are the evil. They're not going to want to hear what I say, because what happens, and this is what this mind warping kind of system relies upon, our egos are like a very dominant part of our individuality. And when you go down a labyrinth of a set of beliefs, and then you've publicly, said, oh, I believe this, I believe that, Soros is a reptile, I believe that the Democrats are connected to the New World Order, and all that stuff, it's very painful and uncomfortable for somebody then to relinquish a belief structure, and to be like, oh, well, actually, I thought that I knew all of that stuff, but when I really reflect and just slow my breathing down and think about how do I actually know that the vaccines were, a kill shot, or that even though that didn't happen, I still have this feeling that they're a kill shot. Where's this information coming from? And then try to distinguish between, kind of reason, feeling, impulse, and so on, and be like, oh, actually, I've been getting this sort of ambient messaging, from people in my peer group, from right-wing media sources, from social media, but I actually don't know that this is the case. And it could be, and there might actually be reason to think that there are very powerful interests who want American democracy, as fragile and flawed as it is, to totally crater and to end forever. And for this to become another autocracy, like Hungary, like China, Franco's Spain, they would benefit a lot from that. And it could be that they've put a lot of effort, billions and billions of dollars, like Rupert Murdoch, maybe even, in some ways the guys behind Netflix, certainly Putin, these other right-wing, media, Steve Bannon, they've put huge amounts of money and time into completely confusing and in a way mind warping our perspective on reality. So we actually have to do quite a bit of work right now to sort of come back to some kind of center. So that's why I'm taking the time to do this podcast with you. Well,
I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Appreciate it, Daniel. It's a lot of information for people, but I just thought it's better to have these conversations, and I try to go out there and listen to conversations that maybe I don't agree with to try to understand, like, what is the thinking going on out there. And I think that's healthy. We should, like, challenge our beliefs, question everything.
Yeah.
But this is a time when lazy thinking, I think, is just there's no space for it. We have to be able to hold a lot of things at once, a lot of nuance. It is a lot of information, and yes, things are collapsing, and it is hard, and people have been screwed over. It's true.
Yeah,
things are messed up.
I have a little bit of hope because I also think that just like we can have a snowball turn into a avalanche in the other direction. So if people start to realize they've been conned and hoodwinked by this right-wing media machine and this sort of psyop manipulation warfare, they can actually begin to deprogram themselves, and that can become a really quick movement in the other direction. I mean, I'm always kind of hopeful because when I wrote my first book, Breaking Open the Head on psychedelics, that came out in 2002, like everybody in my area thought that psychedelics were garbage. Like the New York Times called them toys for the hippie generation. And then I saw, kind of a new awareness percolate, and over like 10 years, we entered a whole new area where psychedelics were recognized as very important for science and for therapy and so on. And that's still an ongoing movement. But change can actually happen, particularly now that we're all, very interconnected and instantaneously connected. Change can actually happen very quickly. So anybody who listens to this, they can get a transcript, right? This will be on YouTube. If they go to Chrome, they can use AI, they get a transcript, they can go through it. They can go to my Substack, danielpinchbeck.substack.com. I've made most of the recent political essays freely available with links to everything so that people can go through the links for themselves. They can look at what Larry Ellison has said. They can look at Curtis Yarvin. They can look at what Musk has been doing. They can read about, Russian political technology. They can really begin to deprogram for themselves. And if they need a day or two to do that, maybe fucking call out of work for a day and just spend a little bit of time and really breathe through this. And then they can go to things like Move the Vote. They can go to the Reach app, and within 10 days to 2 weeks, we can prevent this constitutional democracy, as flawed and imperfect as it is, from tipping over into a fascist theocracy where women have no rights for abortion, where immigrants are demonized and rounded up into camps, where there's mass deportations, where college kids can't protest against things they hate, like what's happening in Gaza, because they'll be imprisoned, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Where we're under surveillance all the time and so on. So I really think this is a very powerful moment and a great opportunity for people to make a mind shift.
Well, I highly recommend your Substack, and I think we can leave it on that little hopeful note that there are infinite possibilities here. And that rapid change can happen because rapid change has been happening, and we can hopefully steer that in different directions.
We can move in the direction. We can steer
it definitely can happen.
Yeah. Anything else, Trevor, that you need from me? And I definitely recommend download that app for yourself, the Reach app. You can do a training with the guy who can connect to you, but also get your network engaged, because you probably, as a musician, travel through a lot of these states, have a lot of fans in these battleground states. And if you can get a few of them on board with using this app and reaching out to their communities, it could actually make a huge difference for the election. All
right. Well, don't hang up, but we're going to end this episode. Yep. And thanks a lot, Daniel.
Thanks for having me.
Well, there it is. Daniel Pinchbeck. Check out his Substack. It's quite good. And check out the resources about just being engaged in politics and, share your voice. Whatever your voice is, share it. We trust you. We trust you to be in this process and to look into your heart and see what's just like the best decision moving forward, even if it's a tough one. This song that you're hearing in the background is called Open Wide, and it is from the new original documentary soundtrack album that is out now wherever you listen to music, which is the soundtrack for Music for Mushrooms. Hope to see you in the Bay Area this weekend. There's many more events after that. I'm going to a lot of them. Go to musicformushrooms.com. It spells it all out. Get your tickets now. And we're digging into the fall, digging in here towards the solstice, towards the election. You know what to do. Keep walking.